Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're looking at something that I think affects us all, whether we realize it or not. It's the connection between how credible someone seems and how much power they actually end up having.
Hmm.
Our source for this is a cool study, actually. It's from the Journal of Applied Social Psychology. And I should mention the lead author's name is a Guinness, like the beer.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So anyway, this study was all about trying to figure out how do our perceptions of a manager's power actually change, not just based on, their actual authority in a company, but also on how believable people think they are. They started with a classic framework, the 5 bases of power. That's from French and Raven. Reward power, coercive power, legitimate, referent, expert power. But for this study to make things a little simpler, they focus on just 2 of them. Reward power, so the ability to give something positive, and then coercive power, which is basically being able to punish.
Right. So they kind of isolated the idea of objective power. If someone can reward you or punish you, they clearly have some power over you no matter what.
Yeah, it's like a baseline level of power.
Yeah.
And then they went and created this fictional manager. His name was, you're going to love this, Mr. Ben.
Mr. Ben.
I know, right?
Oh, yeah.
They presented these like little stories, these vignettes about Mr. Ben to some undergraduate participants. In some of the stories, Mr. Ben was a supervisor, so he had some real authority. But sometimes he was just like a regular employee, maybe temporarily filling in for his boss. So lower on the totem pole. But here's the interesting part. They also messed with how credible Mr. Ben seemed. So sometimes they describe him as being truthful 90% of the time, making him highly credible. And other times it was only 50%, so kind of a coin toss on whether you could trust him.
It seems pretty straightforward that in that case, the objective power would come into play, and it did. Participants definitely rated the supervisor version of Mr. Ben as having more power. But the really interesting part is that credibility also played a role.
Wait, so even though they weren't specifically measuring like expert power or referent power, those other bases from French and Raven, just how believable Mr. Ben seemed still affected how powerful people thought he was.
Yeah, exactly. It seems like judging someone's credibility is so important to how we view them. It's hard to separate it from their power. It's like this hidden ingredient that flavors everything else.
Whoa. Okay, so is it fair to say that being seen as truthful actually gave Mr. Ben a power boost, even if he wasn't a supervisor?
Yeah, you could say that. Especially when he had low objective power. Being seen as highly credible boosted his perceived power across all 5 of those power bases. It's like trustworthiness filled in the gaps where he didn't have any formal authority.
Interesting. So it's like if you don't have the big title
Mm.
or the power to,
Yeah.
hand out rewards or punishments,
Yeah.
being seen as trustworthy can give you a boost.
Yeah, exactly. It's like even without all that official authority, you can still have influence just by being someone that people trust.
That reminds me of this colleague I used to work with. She wasn't a manager or anything, but whenever she spoke up,
Yeah.
everyone would listen. People really trusted her judgment. It's like her credibility gave her this aura of influence, way beyond her actual job title.
That's a perfect example of how this works in real life. We're always making judgments about trustworthiness, sometimes without even realizing it. Think about online reviews, for example.
Oh, yeah,
How much weight we give to those.
totally. Or even asking a friend for a recommendation.
Exactly. We're always looking for those signs of credibility. But what I find really interesting is, remember how the study only focused on 2 power bases? Reward and coercive. They didn't look at legitimate power or expert power or referent power.
Right.
But they still found that credibility affected how people saw Mr. Ben across all 5.
Wait, so you're saying credibility might be even more important to how we see power than we thought? Like it's not just a boost, it's a force of its own.
That's what this study seems to suggest. It really makes us rethink how we understand power
Well,
and just how big a role credibility plays.
okay, my mind is officially blown. But let's bring it back to our listeners for a second. What does all this mean for them?
Well, I think there are a couple of important takeaways. First, if you're in a position where you don't have a lot of formal authority, like you're new to a company or working on a project outside your usual area, you really want to focus on building credibility.
Makes sense, but how do you actually do that? It's not like you can just walk around with a sign that says, trust me.
Right, of course not. It's about showing you're competent, reliable, and have integrity through what you do and how you communicate. Show up prepared to meetings. Follow through on what you say you'll do. Be honest, even when it's tough. Those are the things that build trust over time.
And being a good listener, right? Showing people you actually care about their perspective.
Yeah,
No one trusts someone who just bulldozes through every conversation.
absolutely. Building credibility is about respect. just as much as it is about showing what you can do.
Okay, so that's one thing. Build credibility, especially if you don't have a lot of authority. But what about people who are already in positions of power? Does this research tell them anything?
Definitely. It tells leaders that formal authority isn't enough. You might have the title and the power to make decisions, but if you're not trustworthy, that authority won't get you very far.
People might do what you say because they have to, but they won't be truly on board if they don't respect you. And that can really make it hard to get things done.
Exactly. Leaders need to remember, never take your credibility for granted. Always work to keep it strong by being fair, transparent, and accountable. But this brings up another question. What about those people who seem to have a lot of power, even though they don't have any real authority?
You mean like those charismatic people everyone follows? Or social media influencers?
Exactly. Where does credibility fit into that?
This is really making me think. It seems like we need to explore this idea of credibility as its own power a little bit more. But we should probably save that for after a quick break. All right, so we're back, and I'm still kind of stuck on that last idea. You know, credibility being like a secret power source. People could be super influential, even without having official authority.
It's a really interesting concept. Makes you wonder if we've been focusing too much on the traditional stuff. The titles, the positions, the ability to reward or punish people. Maybe credibility is even more important.
So how do we approach those situations then, where someone has a lot of influence, but maybe not a ton of official power? Like, should we be more skeptical of charismatic leaders or social media influencers?
I wouldn't say skeptical, necessarily, but definitely more discerning. Charisma and being persuasive aren't bad things in themselves. They can be used for good. But we should always think critically.
Right, so don't just follow someone blindly because they're a good talker. Do some digging, check their track record, see if what they do matches what they say.
Exactly. Look deeper and ask yourself, has this person actually been trustworthy in the past? Do their actions back up what they're saying now?
This is so interesting. It's like you're giving us permission to question authority, not in a rebellious way, but in a thoughtful, informed way.
That's a great way to put it.
We should judge people based on their character and their actions, not just their titles or how many followers they have.
Exactly. And if we all did that more often, I think we'd see a world where real credibility is valued above everything else.
Wow, so much to think about. So let's recap this deep dive quickly. We started by talking about that study, the one that found credibility can boost someone's power, even without authority. But then we started to wonder, is credibility even bigger than that? Is it the foundation of all power?
Right. It's a fascinating question.
And that leads us to our final thought for you all. As you go about your day, pay attention to how you see credibility. Whether you're picking a leader, a news source, even a brand to support, are you looking deeper than the surface? Are you thinking about their track record, their integrity, their actions? Because at the end of the day, those are the things that really show influence and lasting power. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep looking for those signs of real credibility.